Welcome back, I'm Tedward, and today, thanks to Bond Group in Waltham, Massachusetts, we get the pleasure of driving this 2002 Toyota MR2 Spyder. This is the third generation of the MR2, and unlike its predecessors, this one is a full convertible. Although I think there was a very small limited run of less than 100 Spyder versions of the second generation, but man, that would be some really big collector stuff if you had one of those in the garage. Either way, this is a very different approach to the MR2 world than its predecessors because the Gen 1 and Gen 2 had so much more of a Ferrari kind of look. In fact, the Gen 2 really, to me, looks very Pininfarina. This third generation of MR2 took a slightly different approach than its predecessors. In fact, it actually went down in power from the second generation turbo version. It has a 1.8 liter inline four-cylinder with dual overhead cams. It has variable valve timing on the intake side, and it only makes 138 horsepower and 126 pound-feet of torque. However, this car weighs about 2,200 pounds. There are very few cars that weigh 2,200 pounds out in the world today. In fact, a Lotus Elise weighs around 1,800 pounds. The Celica GTS, which was around the same time as this, would have weighed about 2,500 pounds. That's a very light car. So this actually has a pretty decent power to weight ratio and allows that engine to breathe. Now, it doesn't have the VVT Li engine that the Lotus Elise and the Celica GTS have. In fact, the Toyota Matrix, the XRS, I believe, got that engine as well. But that means it's not an 8,200 RPM engine, but it still has enough grunt to get the job done. And keep in mind, this is not like an S2000 fighter, and the price would indicate that as well. When it was new, we were looking at around $25,000, whereas an S2000 would have been closer to $35,000. A 350Z, for example, would have also been around 27 grand. So this actually fits in really nicely as a cheap, fun weekender, but also daily drivable because it's not a hardcore sports car. And it's a little more interesting than a Miata because it's mid-engine. Gluing us to the road is a 185 section tire in the front on a 15-inch wheel, and in the rear, it's staggered. That's a 205. That's presumably because it needs a little more grip in the back to make sure that it's not too twitchy for the average driver who may not be used to driving a mid-engine sports car. A mid-engine sports car is typically reserved for the supercar world, and so a lot of folks who are driving these might be driving their first mid-engine car ever because, well, you'd have had to buy a Ferrari to get that kind of experience, or an NSX. You know, we don't want to be biased. But let's take a look under the hood. Back here, unlike the Boxsters and Caymans of the world, well, there is no space. You are looking at an engine compartment, which for the DIY person, that's a godsend because you can actually operate out of here. You can get some work done under the hood of this thing without having to drop an engine or really put everything in a quote-unquote service position like you would in your Boxster. And it's mated to a great little 5-speed manual transmission. In my research, I thought these were all manuals. I was unaware, and maybe the Toyota people are like, I can't believe you didn't know this, but I didn't know that they had sequential manual transmissions in these cars. In fact, they made them in 5 and 6 speeds. So think about E46 M3 using SMG. It's a manual transmission with a automatically operating clutch. That seems really advanced for a car of this price point. But they weren't very fast because I'm told that they sacrificed speed over clutch life. So the manual was the way to go, and it's a great little manual transmission. Now, I owned a 2000 Celica GTS, and this cabin reminds me of it a lot. Obviously, the steering wheel, the shifter, and these little aluminum pedals. Everything just reminds me of my old car. Let's take a look in the frunk. And just when you thought this could be a cheap daily grocery getter, well, think again. There is no frunk either. Really, you get a little bit of space up here. Pardon my wire. And there's your spare tire. But, you know, you're not fitting a lot of stuff up here. This is not an airport run kind of vehicle, which is a little bit of a bummer. But that doesn't mean there's no storage space. There actually is a kind of an abundance of storage space behind the seats, although kind of awkward shaped, and I've just got a bunch of my photography stuff in here right now. It has a manual opening roof, which I love because we don't need the heavy electronics, and because it's such a small roof, you just don't need to be exhausted by all the energy going through that. If that breaks, it's always a nightmare. You've got a plexi or glass. I guess it's glass, right? I don't know. It doesn't feel like the strongest glass, but there's glass nonetheless, and it's heated, so you could drive it in some frosty weather. But I like that because you're not worried about folding it like you are in a Miata and all that stuff. So this is really quick and easy stuff, and that's what you want in your actual little sports car. There's even this little storage area right up here, I guess for sunglasses and maybe your phone and stuff. I think maybe we'll try that with mine. So let's get it started up, take it for a drive. $7,000 RPM redline, center tachometer, just the information you need, not much you don't. 15,828 miles on this car. That's pretty low. I don't know that I've seen that on an MR2 before. Pulling away, it's a very soft, not particularly tactile clutch. But you know it's moving because the car's moving. It's not hard to deal with, but you've got to be a little patient with it on those upshifts or else you'll upset the car just a touch. So 138 horsepower may not sound like much because it isn't, but it's only having to pull the 2,200 pounds of this car and the 130 pounds of me along with it. The damping is fantastic because I can go over real New England roads that are not curated for sports cars, and I'm really not bothered. Handling characteristics are much sportier than I anticipated. I always thought these were kind of like pseudo sports cars. It's not. Bit of wind noise, highway speeds. Let's see, maybe we put the windows down. Now the whistling's still there. So that's just something you're gonna have to live with. Fifth gear, 69, 70 miles an hour, 3,500 RPM. Could definitely use a 6-speed. The shifter feel, though, is really good. That's something that I remember loving about my Celica back in the day, was that it felt sporty. It kind of looks goofy, like this shifter always looked a little tall to me, but the engagement and the feel was really dialed in. Short gearing, so you're always engaging with the car, which is what you want. It has power steering. Go over some of these ugly bumps. It handles it, and it's all well put together. I'm not getting all kinds of NVH out of the dashboard or anything. This is actually really nice. I mean, that's wide open. So if you need more speed, if you need more power, this isn't going to do it for you. It's not a great highway commuter because you've got a little bit of wind whistling and noise like that. I'm sure if you put the roof up, it's all right. There is no cruise control on the manual cars. But even though it's small, it has a relatively long wheelbase, and that makes it really stable and nice at highway speeds. What do we have here? I don't know what that is. Military something or rather. That's cool. So even though we're turning a bunch of revs, it's not darty. It's actually doing the Grand Touring thing really nicely. It's just that it's doing it at like 4,000 RPM. But what's fun is that you get to go wide open through, 3 or 4 gears and still be within limits. You're not going to jail for that. You try that in a Porsche Boxster, a Spyder today, you're already above every speed limit in the country at the top of second gear. These brakes only have to haul down 2,200 pounds, so they're not very big, but they are effective. And they're predictable and nice. I mean, if you wanted to make this into like a little track toy here and there, just blowing through reds, okay. People just run in red lights all the time lately. All you'd have to do is, put in some higher temp fluid and some aggressive pads. You'd be good to go. The front end pushes a little bit, but it comes back off throttle. I mean, this like rotates really nicely when you just get off throttle. It's such a smooth engine too. Like, it revs out really nicely. I don't feel all kinds of harsh, ugly, 4-cylinder vibrations happening. It wants to go. It's a little sewing machine. Every corner is fun. It becomes like a big K car. It feels like a grown-up K car. Let's talk ergonomics while we're out here just driving behind some traffic. The seating position, originally I thought was a little too high, and I still maybe stand by that, but I've settled into the car really nicely. Oddly enough though, even though this is a low car, I am not riding on the ground. If you get into a Porsche Spyder or GT4 with the carbon buckets, oftentimes you feel like you're kind of crouched down here, which is where you'd like to be, but in a daily driving situation where you want visibility, this is optimal. This is actually better. this steering wheel is this perfect, happy little size. I love it. This is what, and it's not too thick. We're not playing that game that BMW likes to play, where they just make the biggest chonkin wheels you can find to be more sporty for whatever reason. Like, it's a little dainty, and it's exactly what I want to hold when I'm chucking a small little sports car into a corner. Visibility, phenomenal, because, let's see, we're gonna take this left here. We're gonna let this fella, go ahead. The visibility out of this is fantastic, because even though I've got the mid-engine convertible top thing going on, it's not that tall. So I can see everything over that quarter. And look at that. You can go full throttle in a car and have fun and not feel like you're really doing some scary stuff. You know, it's not going to go sideways. You don't have enough torque to drift this car. That's not a possibility. It makes noise, but it's inoffensive. I don't think anyone's calling you in if they hear this. And here's the question. How does it compare to a Miata? It feels a little more well-built. I mean, it feels a little more solid. I'm having also a different experience, because the Miata, I feel like I want to slide around. I maybe play that oversteer game a little more. In this, I feel like I'm dancing with the car. I don't necessarily want a lot of slip angle, but because it's mid-engine, I'm able to really dial in the rotational angle in a corner with my right foot. And you can steer it on your right foot like a proper mid-engine car. Ooh, crane. So by the numbers, it's slow, but by the seat of your pants, it's enough for a tight, windy back road. I'm a little surprised by this. My final thoughts on this is that it's underrated. It's not fast in a straight line. 138 horsepower is not going to wow you, even with this sort of weight. But the chassis dynamics and control that you have in a midship design are fun. You've got a mid-engine, rear-wheel drive sports car, and it is a true mid-engine feel. Maybe you can't afford the Porsche world. Maybe you can't afford the Ferrari world. If you want this experience in an actual car that isn't, say, some tiny little K car that, you know, you'll be clobbered in by any kind of traffic, not to say that this is all that much safer, but it's a real car, I bet you can get into these pretty darn cheap. I actually don't know what they're worth right now. And what a fun, just cheerful vehicle. And if you happen to have a place to go where you're either up in the canyons or on the coast, somewhere to be in that top-down, experience the world kind of thing, what a perfect little runabout. Only detractors here are storage space for me, because there's really nowhere to put anything big. So if you're gonna have this as your weekender, well, hopefully you have a place that you already keep your stuff, because you're not gonna fit much luggage in this. You're gonna have to get some soft duffel bags and a partner who packs light. So thank you guys so much for watching, liking, commenting, and subscribing. Go drive yourself. Look at this. We're going over some kind of ugly bumps. It's so composed. Nothing's rattling off the car, and there's plenty of sidewall, and the suspension is tuned for the streets. It's beautiful, beautiful thing. So don't be shy. Go drive yourself an MR2. It's a reliable Toyota with a mid-engine power plant. Doesn't get much better than this. Thank you guys so much for watching, liking, commenting, and subscribing. Don't forget to respect the drive, and I'll see you in the next one.